Hi, everyone. Happy spring. It's the first day of spring. I can feel the allergies. Well, there are going to be a number of themes that you're already hearing. I took very seriously this lovely invitation to talk about academic failure and the road to success as a storyteller. I'm an ethnographer. I don't have a PowerPoint for you. I'm just going to tell you a few stories. Like Carlos, I read some inspirational quotations about failure. And one of the things that struck me, I like the Churchill quote as well, and I found a couple of others that I liked. One from Emerson, who said, "Our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising up every time we do." I liked Thomas Edison, who also said, "I've not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work." Henry Ford said, "Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently." So I found lots of these. One thing that struck me, though, as you heard, I'm an ethnographer, I'm an anthropologist, I do most of my field work in the Caribbean. I found one Caribbean quote that I'll share with you that says, "Nothin' beat a trial but a failure." In other words, you can't succeed if you don't try. What struck me, though, was that I found very few quotes by women. And I've been thinking a lot about the gender of failure and how women in particular meet the challenges that all people face when they don't succeed at something. And I'm drawing here upon my experience as the dean of the faculty, where I meet with, I think there are 550 faculty members in the college for whom I try to provide some guidance in one way or another. I oversee the tenure and promotion process, and I mentor a lot of faculty who are going through these really critical junctures in their career. And I'm a teacher, and I work with undergraduate and graduate students all the time. I'm a mother. I have 2 teenage daughters who are confronting failures and successes. They are used to being A students, but occasionally something goes awry. So in all of these different capacities, I think a lot about how we face these bumps along the road. And so I thought what I would try to do is to both think somewhat analytically about both the gender of failure and to give you a few examples from my own experience at 3 particular points in my own career. One of the things that strikes me about the gender of failure is the particular experience of shame that I hear a lot of women express. And this is not to say that men don't experience shame when they hit a roadblock, but I hear this especially from women at all different ages and career moments. One of our most senior faculty, and I won't name her, but she's probably known to most of you, came to a meeting recently that we had. We were doing a program review, and we were talking about the fact that in faculty self-evaluation at the end of every year, all of the faculty in the College of Arts and Sciences fill out this very annoying electronic self-report called the OFARS report. And in it, you account for all of the teaching you've done, all of the scholarship you've done, grants you've applied for, fellowships you've applied for, and then you note whether you've achieved them or not. And this is a person who has achieved among the most extraordinary success that one could achieve in her field. And she was nominated for many things that she didn't note in her OFARS report. And we asked her about that, and she said, "Oh, I would never mention things I didn't succeed at." And again, she talked about this sense of shame at not getting the honor that somebody thought she was eligible for and had put her forward for, and then she hadn't gotten it. And rather than feeling just simply really proud that somebody had noted her eligibility, she experienced more the failure. It's the same experience that many of us have as teachers when, say, you teach a class of 50 students and you get 5 evaluations that are really negative. If you're like me, you hone right in on those and you feel horrible. And you forget that 45 students loved your class. And I think, again, this is a human reaction. It also, I think, has a particular feminine dimension to it. Okay, I'm not I'm not a psychologist. It's beyond me to talk I've read a bit about this because it interests me both personally and analytically, but I'm not going to share with you my own theories about shame and why women in particular turn aggression, anger, resentment inward, and it becomes shame instead. We can talk about that in some other venue, perhaps. I'm going to share with you 3 junctures of failure in my own career trajectory and how I tried to deal with them. As some way of just illustrating that when you look at a CV, you see the successes, and I've been delighted to experience a fair number of those. My first really dramatic failure in the academy, I'm not going back to my undergraduate days, I'm starting with graduate school, was as an anthropologist, I wrote my first set of grant proposals to do my dissertation research. And I applied to all of the usual suspects, and the first feedback I started to get was from the National Science Foundation, and I got 3 reviews. They happily send the reviews to you as a graduate candidate, and 2 of the reviews I got the highest evaluation possible. I was really delighted, and I thought people really get this project, and I'm so excited to do this research. And the 3rd gave me the lowest possible rating of a poor. And I'm sure it was a man. And again, I got really paranoid and really angry and really upset. And I read this review, and I could just hear this. And he got it completely wrong. It was the quintessence of the stupid review. And he mischaracterized my sample, he just didn't read it carefully. And I did some of what my colleagues have recommended. I sat in a quiet place. I can't remember if I had a glass of wine or not. I tried to collect my thoughts. I contacted my dissertation advisor. I probably cried a little bit. And this was long before the internet and email. And I picked up the phone and I called. And again, I hadn't gotten any advice about a program officer or whatever. I don't know whether that is typically advisable for a graduate student, but I picked up the phone and I called the number that was at the bottom of the NSF letter to the Social and Behavioral Sciences Division, of which anthropology is a part, expecting to get an assistant on the phone who could help me know how to reach out to someone. And instead, I got a guy named Stuart Plattner, who was the head of anthropology, on the phone. He just said, "Plattner here." And I remember just being really rattled, thinking, oh, I didn't mean to call you, Dr. Plattner. I just thought I was going to get an assistant who could. And he said, well, how can I help you? And I said, well, I've just read the reviews of my dissertation, grant proposal, and I'm really troubled because one of the reviewers who I assume to have, sunk my candidacy seems not to have really read my proposal. And instead of just dismissing me, he said, well, hang on a minute. And he pulled my paper folder. We didn't submit electronically in those days. And he pulled it out, and I sat on the phone patiently waiting, and he read these 3 reviews, and he said, you're right. And within 20 minutes, I had my funding. And, again, I don't know if this was routine, if this happened to very many people, but it was a real lesson to me in not just quietly going into the night and sinking my head into my pillow, which is also what I felt like doing. Now, I'm going to share with you another experience in which I had a different impulse. And I waltzed off to the field, and I got 3 different grants, and I had many bumps along the way of the field work, which I won't share with you. My second major failure came many years later. I had tenure already, and I had a sabbatical leave. Actually, more than a sabbatical leave, I had a fellowship at our Center for Humanistic Inquiry, this incredible opportunity to spend a year working on a book project. And I decided to spend the bulk of that year working on a kind of the greatest hits article of what would then become my book. And I killed myself working on this article. And I thought it was really the most important piece of work I had ever done. And I sent it at the invitation of the editor of the flagship journal of my field, who had heard me present a version of this at our national meetings, I sent this greatest hits piece to the American Ethnologist, our big journal. And I, again, got a couple of really great reviews and one really critical review. And it was just turned down. I didn't get an R&R and a revise and resubmit. It was just turned down, even though 2 of the reviews were really good. And I was devastated. I was absolutely gobsmacked. And I was demoralized, I was depressed, I was angry. And I put that article and those reviews in my drawer, and I taught my classes, and I didn't tell anybody. I just felt so ashamed and so completely undone. And that article sat in my drawer with those reviews for almost 2 years. And it was only at the point that a new member of the faculty joined the anthropology department, and we got to talking about something, and he remembered this paper somehow, and I shared with him this story. And he said, well, let me look at those reviews. And he looked at the reviews, and he said, I don't know how they just turned this down. 2 of these reviews are phenomenal. The elements of this 3rd review seem so petty and so small and so easily fixable. I think you should call the editor up. And with that one conversation, I called the editor up and I said, would you be willing to talk about this? And she said, absolutely. And we had a conversation and she said, send me your revised version. I spent 1 day doing some minor revisions. And I sent it to her, now by email, which had been developed in the meanwhile. And 9 months later, it appeared in print. And the lesson of that story was, for me, I was without the kind of mentor I needed in those 2 intervening years. I really did not have a network to help me handle that rejection. And with that one really powerful, influential conversation with one of our colleagues, it turned things around for me, and it gave me the confidence to finish my book ultimately, because this was the heart of my book. And I thought, if this gets rejected, well then, where is the monograph going to be? Okay, one final failure, and it's a current failure. Leap ahead many years to being promoted to full professor, becoming the senior associate dean for faculty. I'm in a very different environment right now, and I have a really different life, a different rhythm to my job that doesn't allow very much time for research, which is really something I'm trying to figure out. And in my first year of this position in the dean's office, I was invited to submit an article to a major volume on neoliberalism, one of the main themes that I work on. And I was to contribute kind of the anchor of my work to this huge volume that the whole cast of stars of the broader interdisciplinary field of economists, political scientists, political theorists, sociologists, anthropologists, everyone who's the biggest name was going to be in this volume. And they invited me to write this chapter on affect and neoliberalism. And I was really honored, and I said yes. And I thought, this is exactly what I need. And the long and the short of it is, my year just got eaten by other things. And I just couldn't find the time to write this piece. And so this is a very present failure. You can probably hear, it just literally makes me want to weep, because I ultimately had to say to this editor, I can't do it. I've failed. I thought I could do it. I promised this thing. I can't do it. How am I dealing with this? It's a very current conundrum for me. And in a way, it gets back to our 2 previous presentations, that in a way, one of the critical elements to succeeding in the face of these challenges is collaboration. And I've realized that it's almost impossible for me to find the uninterrupted time to do the kind of intellectual work, the reading and the writing that I want to do. By collaborating, and I know this from some positive experiences, I can somehow better insist upon carving some time when I need to be accountable to a co-author. Somehow, for whatever reason in my own psyche, it's harder for me to do that for myself than it is when I also have an obligation to another person. And so I've proposed to a colleague of mine at UCLA to co-author this very piece that I had promised to this volume, and to write it for a journal, and hopefully it will get published. Who knows? Anyway, so I end with that sense of, the conundrum, the fact that failure is not something that we ever really leave behind, no matter how old or how advanced in our career we become. Thank you.